In this lecture, we are going to look at using functions for different reasons. Let's look at number 1. Number 1 says s of 3. That means we're going to take the number 3 and plug it into the function s of x. So, we are going to have negative 4. We're going to plug the 3 in for the x squared plus 2. And now we're going to simplify it. 3 squared, meaning 3 times 3, is going to be 9. I'm going to bring everything else down. Negative 4 times 9 is negative 36. Bring down the plus 2. And negative 36 plus 2 is negative 34. So s of 3 equals negative 34. Here we have s of r of negative 5. I'm going to focus on the inside first. I have r of negative 5. So r of negative 5 equals 3 times negative 5 minus 1 divided by 2. 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. Minus 1 divided by 2. Negative 15 minus 1 is negative 16 divided by 2. And negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. So r of negative 5 is negative 8. But we're not done. This r of negative 5 is negative 8. So now I have s of negative 8. So now I'm going to plug in negative 8 into the s function. So I have negative 4 times negative 8 squared plus 2. Negative 8 squared is 64. I'm going to bring down everything else. Negative 4 times 64 is negative 256 plus 2. Negative 256 plus 2 is negative 254. So that means s of r of negative 5 equals negative 254. Now the last one. We have s of 3 times r of 3. So for s of 3, I'm going to plug it into the s function. So I have negative 4 times 3 squared plus 2. 3 squared is 9. Bring down everything else. Negative 4 times 9 is negative 36 plus 2. And I have negative 34. So s of 3 is negative 34. Now I have to do r of 3. So r of 3 is going to be 3 times 3 minus 1 divided by 2. So then I have 9 minus 1 divided by 2. 9 minus 1 is going to be 8. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So r of 3 is 4. I'm going to multiply these together, and 34 times 4 is 136. So my answer is s of 3 times r of 3 equals negative 136. For the second question, we're going to talk about domain. And domain is going to be all the x values that make the equation true. Now let's take a look at this graph. So I'm looking for all the x values that make this true. So what I want to look at is all of the x values on the x-axis. Now, if this graph were to keep going, all of these x values eventually would still touch the graph if I drew lines all the way up. Now, our graph doesn't go all the way up, but imagine that it would. So, our domain is all real numbers. So all of these x values will work. The second graph is going to be a little bit better picture. Notice the graph. I have all of these x values along the x-axis. And pretend that that graph keeps going past 10 and negative 10. So what is the domain of this one? Again, all real numbers. Now we have some functions. I have f of x equals 3x plus 2. Think to yourself, what numbers could I plug in for x? If I wanted to, I could plug in 1, I could plug in 10, I could even plug in 1,000,000, or negative 1,000,000. So I could plug in any x value. So again, this is all real numbers. Now, this is a special case. I have f of x equals 5 divided by x plus 2. So what x values could I plug in? I'm going to go ahead and say I could plug in all real numbers. But notice the bottom part here. It says x plus 2. If I were to plug in negative 2, then I would have 5 divided by 0. Because negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Well, on your calculators, if you take 5 divided by 0, that can't happen. So that means I could plug in any x value except for negative 2. And for except, I'm going to put the equal sign with the slash through it. So my domain is all real numbers except x cannot equal negative 2. Now let's take a look at this one. I have f of x equals the square root of x plus 9. Now the best way for you to figure out what x values don't work for x is to start plugging in numbers. I'm going to go ahead and put all real numbers. But what would happen if you plugged in, let's say, 1? Well, 1 plus 9 is 10. You can take the square root of 10. What if I plugged in negative 9? Well, negative 9 plus 9 is 0. And you can do the square root of 0 on a calculator. But if you plug in negative 10, negative 10 plus 9 is a negative 1. Try taking the square root of negative 1 on your calculator. It can't happen. So that means all real numbers and x has to be greater than negative 10. So that means it could be negative 9, it could be negative 8, and so on, upwards, but it cannot be less than negative 10. That does not work. The last thing I want to talk about in this lecture is rate of change. Now, you guys have already all seen this. Rate of change is just another word for slope. So I want to go over again how to find slope. Let's say you're given a graph. You need to find 2 points on the graph, and then all you're going to do is find the rise, which in this case is 2, and the run, which is 4. So this slope is going to be 2 over 4. Now, from this equation, you guys have seen something like this before. If you remember this, f of x equals delta x plus f of 0. Well, you'll notice that the 1/3 is actually my slope.